So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is the last session of all of the back-to-backs after yesterday's interesting experience. So, thank you so much for coming to join me here. Now, I'm going to be talking about static web apps and Blazor today, and it all started sometime mid-2021. And I saw this blog post that was talking about building your own brand. That if you are blogging on somebody else's platform, no matter how awesome that platform is, you're putting your time, your effort, and your energy into building up somebody else's brand rather than doing your own. And I thought, well, that's kind of a point. And I literally, in bed at 10:15 at night, bought a domain. Actually, I bought 3 domains, because seriously, who can ever buy one? And I got stacyclouds.com, stacyclouds.net, and stacyclouds.dev. And after that, I did nothing, because buying a domain and using a domain are 2 separate hobbies. And the thing that stopped me was I didn't just want to put a static text blog out there. I wanted to try new things, experiment, learn new stuff. And that meant that I needed a web server, and I needed to get the DNS sorted, and I have a full-time job and a family and a Lego addiction, and there was just no way that I had time to do this. Then I started to learn about Blazor, and I said, okay, I can make a quick web application, that's cool, but I've still got to host it. And then I started to play with Azure static web apps. And I've been playing with them since they were in preview, and I love them instantly. And I love them instantly because all of the stuff that I didn't actually want to care about and I didn't actually want to learn about at that time, I didn't need to. If I build a WebAssembly application, I can deploy that as a static site. I don't need to worry about servers. I don't need to worry about setting anything up. I don't need to worry about paying for an app service plan if I'm doing it inside of Azure. It's all done for me. And to get the dynamic data that I want, I've got Azure Functions. And I can get the data out there. And even better than that, if you do this in, say you're using a storage account and a static web app inside of a storage account, you can hook that up to Functions too. And then you have to worry about cores, and then you have to get your domains working properly, and you need to proxy it a little bit to get it to work nicely. And it was awesome. But it's a pain. Very quickly, you get up to like 5 different resources that you've got to contain. With the static web apps, it's one. And in that one container, we have our static front end, we have our Azure backend, and we have all this lovely glue, which joins the 2 together and makes one usable application that I don't have to worry about, because I love not having to worry about how to wire all of this up. And so I started to build my website. And it was kind of a work in progress. It will be for an age yet. But just something that I could fire up in an evening when I didn't have anything to do, and put an hour or 2 hours and just take it one step further, and learn as I went. And yeah, I've now got something that's kind of online, it's kind of looking half decent, and it does what I want it to do. It takes my blog posts from dev.to and it displays them on my website in my look and feel. And the next step is to add authentication and move forward. And what I want to do today is actually go through that with you. To create a static web app, to get it deployed, to implement authentication, to look at debugging, to make a custom domain, and just to see what we can do really quickly to get something working. Tell the world who you are. Which is a nice segue. Who am I? Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I am Tech Explorer DevOps at Omniplan. We are a financial advice software company based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been coding since the mid-1990s, and I am supremely honored to say that I've been a Microsoft MVP for the last 2 years. Now, enough of me talking. Let's have a look at some code and see how many typos I can do in the next 40, 50 minutes. So the first thing that we're going to be doing today is actually just basically making our application. And we're going to do that by just firing up a Blazor WebAssembly app and an Azure function. So let's get that going. Let's see if I can actually see the screen on the side of me. There we go. We want a Blazor WebAssembly app. We're going to be calling it client. We are going to be putting it in that location because I need that for my GitHub repo to work. And we also need to give it a name to get the GitHub repo to work too. So let's just bring that one across. There we go. And I pressed back instead of forward, didn't I? Oh, good, it remembered everything. There we go. We want a .NET 6 long-term support app because, of course, we do. We're not going to be worrying about authentication at this stage. I'm going to be adding that later on. We're going to be configuring it for HTTPS because please always configure it for HTTPS. We're not going to be hosting it in a .NET Core application because, of course, we want those static files that we can deploy. And I'm doing nothing with PWA, so we're just going to ignore that box for now. Let's create that and get that one spun up. Talk nicely to the little computer. Come on, you can do it. You're not connected to Teams. You can be faster than this. And into this solution, we are going to add a new project. And that new project is going to be our Azure functions, how we're going to get data to our front end. We're going to be calling this one API. And you may notice I called the Blazor client, and I'm calling this API. There is a reason for that, and I'll get to that in about 5 minutes. We want that in the same place. Let's bring it in. And we're going to make this empty so that I don't have to just delete everything as soon as I create it. So this is going to be the core of our application. Now, the first thing we're going to do, I don't need to delete anything from the API because that has a nice empty template. I am going to delete an amount of stuff from the Blazor application because I don't want all of that example code in there. If I remember rightly from Steve's session yesterday, they are going to make an empty template for Blazor, so hopefully I don't have to do this for too much longer. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to delete Jimmy's favorite page, the counter. And we're going to delete the fetch data. No, not the whole pages directory. That would be bad. Yep. We are going to delete the sample data because I don't want to leave that one in there either. I really like this a little bit clean. And then because we've deleted those pages, we're just going to clean up the navigation a little bit too. So we're going to open this shared folder, open the nav menu, and we're going to delete these last two items. So anybody who's ever newed up a Blazor project, you will see on the sidebar you have a counter link, you have a fetch data link, and we don't have those anymore. Last but not least, I want to clean up the main layout just a little bit. So I want to get rid of this link to the ASP.NET documentation. It's an awesome link. Use it if you need it, but I don't particularly want it on my blog, so we're going to take that out. And I think we're about there. You know, let's get rid of this survey prompt too, because we don't want that either. And then we do the wonderful first build, and what did I break? Drum roll, please. Build, please. Yes, build succeeded. Cool, we can carry on then. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to read all of my blog posts from dev.to, and I'm going to make them available to put onto my website. As I said, I love dev.to. I still post to dev.to. I just display it on my website right now. And when I switch that, I'm still going to cross-post to dev.to automatically because it is a nice platform. It's just not the only place I want to be. So inside of our API, we're going to make a models folder because I'm going to do some real demo coding later on today, but I'm going to start off properly and not be too bad at the beginning. So we want a models directory, and then we're going to make an object to hold our dev.to posts. So let's add a new class. And let's call that blog post summary. And like I say, you don't want to watch me do typos for the next 45 minutes, or maybe you do, I don't know, in which case I apologize. So what I'm going to be doing is bringing over a load of snippets, and I'm going to be walking you through them as we build them. So this first one, it is just a model class. So we're just using the system text JSON serialization namespace, and that's because the object we get from dev.to doesn't quite fit the model that I want inside of my application, so I'm just doing a couple of quick transformations. And we're going to get the ID of the blog post, we're going to get the title, a description, the URL that we need to go to actually see the blog post, and we're going to get a publish date, which It's actually for a different demo than we have today, but yeah, it's in there. We'll get it anyway. Next thing we want to do is actually make the function itself. So let's add a new Azure function here. We want to add an Azure function. We want that one called blog posts. And that one needs to be a HTTP trigger because inside of an Azure Static Web App, you can only use a HTTP trigger for your Azure functions. Unless they've changed it since the last time I read it, and in which case I'm lying to you. So we're going to get rid of all of this code because we're going to bring across a pre-written function. And what this is going to do is we're going to support the HTTP GET method. We are going to be running on the URL of blog posts, so that will be API/blog posts. And we are going to get a HTTP client. I will go through that one in a second because for dev.to, there's special stuff you have to do. And basically, what I'm going to do from dev.to is just go to their API. You don't need a key in order to do this. It's open to the world. And we're going to get all of the articles for my username, Stacy_Cash. We are going to deserialize those to an IEnumerable of the blog post summary. And then we're going to send it back to whoever's calling. And that's all we need our function to do here. The HTTP client, I just want to mention this because my blog post was down for like a week. And it was down because dev.to added 2 fields that you needed to put into the headers. One was the product value, the other was a comment value, and I don't think it actually matters what you put in here, but you need to put something in here, or they just give you a really bad response and nothing works, and you pull your hair out a little bit. So another quick build, make sure I've not done anything wrong yet. And then we can move on to the fun stuff. We can actually get it displayed on the screen. So let's close all the pages so far. Close all tabs. That's good. And we'll drop the API so we're not quite as confused. First thing we need to do, I still need that model that we just used so that I can read the blog posts in and use them on my site. Now, before somebody complains in the front row, I would not copy this code in my actual website. I would make a shared models project for this so that I'm not repeating all of this code, but it's quicker just to do this and make an extra project on the fly, so that's why we're doing it this way. So for that, we are going to add a new folder here again, and that's going to be models. And inside of there, we are going to make another new object. So add class. Wait for the laptop. And this is kind of just really similar to what we had before, only I don't need all of the JSON attributes on this one, so it just looks a little bit cleaner. We just have, again, the ID, URL, title, description, and publish date. Next thing we're going to do is make a service which is going to make that call to the API from our Blazor application. So we're going to add another new folder. That one. And this one's going to be called services. And we're going to make a blog post summary service. And what this is going to do is make the request to the Azure function. It is going to hold the values that we get back. So each time we come to this component, we're not having to remake the same API call and do all of that waiting on I/O. So bring this one across. And for this, we are injecting a HTTP client, and we get this out of the box inside of a Blazor solution. That's automatically in our dependency injection container. We are making available a list of blog post summaries that we can use outside of the service. We have our constructor taken in the HTTP client, of course. And then we just have this load summaries. And what we're doing here is just checking, do I already have a collection of summaries? If I do, fine, finish. And if I don't, we're going to make that call out so that we can get it. So the first time we use it, we have to wait. And after that, it's just really snappy. And the last thing I have to do is add this service to my program CS so that I can use it inside of my components. And we have a nice red squiggly line. So let's do control dot and bring in the using statement. And that should all build now. Yes. Last step for this section, we're actually going to put the blog posts on the screen. And for that, we're going to make a new page. So we're going to come into our pages folder and we are going to add, no, we're not going to scope to this at all. Come on, get me home, thank you. We are going to, oh, come on. Sometimes mice can be really sensitive. We're going to add a razor component. We're not going to add a razor page, which confused me the first time I did this. We're going to add a razor component. The razor pages are only for the MVC, I believe. It creates a CS HTML. If you do it, just delete it, go back, it's fine. And we're going to call that blog posts. And then bring yet another snippet in. So what do we have inside of here? Well, we have a using statement for our client.services so that we can get access to that new blog post service we made. We have a page directive at the top, and this is what turns it into a page. Jimmy, please correct me if I'm wrong here. All pages are components, but not all components are pages. Thank you. We are injecting our blog post summary service so that we can use it to display our blog posts, and then we actually get onto the nice stuff for the users. Adding a page title and a H1 that both say the same thing, but they do different things in the background. Page title sets your tab so that you can see what site you're on, and the H1 is for the users on the page itself. We're checking to see whether or not the service.summaries is null, and if it is, then we know there's nothing there yet, so we're going to show a loading sign. And if we do have summaries, then for each one, we're just going to put on the page the title, the published at, the description, and a link to the summary URL, which, because I know it's a dark pattern, but I don't want people to leave my website yet, I'm opening in a different tab. Last but not least, a little code block underneath, which just on the initialization of the component is going to call that blog post summaries load summaries, so that we can actually get our information from the backend. One last thing we need to do for this first kickoff bit is give our users a way to access our blog post page. So for that one, we're going to come into our navigation menu again, where we just deleted a load of stuff. And we are going to add a second link. And because I really hate it when stuff's not aligned properly, we're going to tab it a little bit. And this is just going to put a link on the side for blog posts, and that is going to link to our page that we've just added. Final build, did it work? It worked. This is good. Next thing, is it going to work online? So what we're going to do now, we're not going to run this locally yet. The next step, we're actually going to create our static web app and actually get this application out onto the web. So we've added our app. We're going to push that out to GitHub. We're going to keep our fingers crossed for the Wi-Fi. Come on, you've started, you can finish. Yes. And then we can go online. So this is my repo that we've just been using. And you can see it's fairly empty aside from a git ignore. And if I refresh this now, we should hopefully see an API, a client, and our solution. So we're going to put this out on the web now. Now, I already have a resource group set up for my static web apps. So inside of there, we're just going to create a new resource. And that's going to be a static web app. So let's create this one. And I'm going to check the subscription and resource group is the same. This should always be correct. And in theory it is, but the difference between theory and practice is in theory the same and in practice they're not. And there are a few resources in Azure that have a bug, and they leave the resource group empty and it will create a new one for you automatically. And suddenly you've got no idea where your things are living. So always check this. Then we need to give it a name. And for this one, we're going to call it NDC London. The nice one here is if you create an app service plan in Azure, you have to have a name which is unique to the whole of Azure. For static web apps, you don't, because this doesn't influence your URL. Azure is going to make you a URL. So as long as this is unique inside of your resource group, it's fine. It hopefully makes naming a little bit simpler, although it does make the URLs a lot more interesting. Then we have the plan that we want. We have a free tier, which does quite a lot of stuff. And then we have a standard tier that just adds a little bit of enterprise goodness on top. For the price-wise, that standard app is still only about I'm from Holland. It's €7 a month. I'm sorry, I have no idea what that is in pounds. But it's not an expensive resource to use, and it gives you access to private endpoints, to custom authentication, and a load of other things, which we'll hopefully get to later on in this talk. For now, though, we're going to leave it free. We're going to use just what's out of the box and see what we can do. We're going to put it in a region, and like I say, I'm from the Netherlands, so I'm going to pick West Europe. And then we see where we're deploying from. Now, I find it interesting that Azure DevOps is in here, because that must mean they've changed it since I wrote this demo. And it now will create you a deploy pipeline inside of Azure DevOps. I've not tested this yet, so I might be lying, but I can't see why else they would put it on the screen. We're going to use GitHub, and for that, you do get a CI/CD pipeline out of the box when you create your static web app. So we're going to pick our organization, and it's me. And then we want our Blazor Talk demo, and I want to deploy my main branch. The last thing that we need to do is set our build presets to tell the CI/CD pipeline how it needs to build the app. And for that, we have lots of options available to us. We have Angular, Blazor, Next, React, Svelte, Vue, Gatsby, Hugo, VuePress, or even a custom one so you can put your own framework in there. You're not tied to Blazor here. You can use whatever front end you want to use. I, on the other hand, do want to use Blazor, so I'm going to put that in. And then you get 3 things that you need to set up for your application to build. You need to say where your app location is, where your API is, your Azure functions, and where your output's going to be. Client and API, this is why I called it client and API, because then you can just use it out of the box. The less I have to type, the less typos I make. And the output location for Blazor, as far as I can tell, it doesn't matter what you put here for Blazor. As long as it's not a folder which exists in your repo, this will work. If you're using Azure, React, or Vue, or any JavaScript front end, it is a whole other story, and you need to make sure that you get this absolutely correct. For Blazor, it's just really simple. So let's do the review and create. Creating a static web app generally takes about 2 seconds. So this should be up really quickly, or it's going to make me into a liar. Come on, you can do it faster than this. There we go. OK, 5 seconds. And here we have our static web app all set up and ready to go. And over here, you can see we have our URL, Ambitious Sky. These have the best names. And if we open this up in a new window, we can see your Azure static web app is live and it's waiting for your content. But I've given it my content because I've given it my GitHub account. So where is it? Well, if we come back to our GitHub repo and we refresh the page, we now have a GitHub workflows file in here. So if we take a very quick look at this, I'm not going to go too in depth, but I just want to show you how it gets out of your account and into the static web app. We have this static web apps deploy v1. And what that would do, it takes a couple of secrets that the portal creates inside of your GitHub repo. It builds your client, your API, and then it uploads it to the static web app. From one here, so there's nothing in here that says that it's Blazor. So if you switch from Blazor to Angular, Jimmy, I'm sure that that's something you're going to be trying. Sorry, I'm going to be picking on you a lot in the next half hour. If you do that, you don't actually need to change anything here aside from these locations. This build step will have a look at what's in your repo. It will determine what language it's building, and then it will build and deploy it for you. That goes for the functions as well that are in API. I have used .NET functions here, but I also have a demo where I'm using TypeScript functions, and this is exactly the same. It picks it up on the fly, and the build step takes care of it for you. This is both awesome and annoying. It's awesome because I don't have to care, and it's annoying because I would like to know a little bit more about what's going on under the hood, but it's not there for us. So when this kicks off, this is going to happen for every push that we do to main. So we're going to have this build step here. It generally takes about 4 minutes to deploy. So while we're waiting for it, why don't we try running it locally and see whether or not it's going to work in production? So for this one, we kind of have an issue because we have our client and our API. Now, I said that in our Azure resource, we have all that wonderful glue in the middle that turns it into one coherent application. We don't have that locally. One's going to run on one port, one's going to run on another port, and how do they talk to each other? During the preview, you had to write your app specifically for this. You had to put steps in there that checked whether or not you were developing. And then when you went into production, it did something slightly different, and it worked quite well, but it was kind of annoying. These days, we have the Static Web Apps CLI that we can use, and that replicates that glue inside of our machines, and that's what we're going to be using today. First thing that we've got to do is make sure that everything starts. So let's set our startup projects, and we want to make sure that we have both our API, and we want to make sure that we have our client, and we're just going to start those off. And this is good. We have our Azure tools over here already. And over here we have a web browser. And here's our home. And if we go to blog posts, we have that unhandled error. That's because it doesn't know where to find our API. So let's find that API for it. For that one, we're going to be using, like I say, the Static Web Apps CLI. This is a Node.js server. You can install it via npm. And when I say it replicates the Azure function, it's really important to remember it replicates the Azure resource. It doesn't give you a static web app on your machine. 99% of it works the same as it does in Azure, but not 100. So always make sure when you do this, do try it in Azure before you push it out to production, because you never know if you're going to get caught out. But it's perfectly good enough for building it at home. So we're going to start it. Our static web app, we're going to go start, and all we're going to tell it is that if it looks at HTTPS localhost, and we want 7226, if I've read that correctly. Yeah. What this is now, no, that's wrong, because I did not do a colon there. Come on, stop. Cool. That really went well, didn't it? Let's try that one again, shall we? Thank you. So we want GitHub, we want our Blazor demo, and we want SWA start HTTPS : localhost 72.20.26. Now that I've got the text right, what this is going to do is any request that it gets on that 4280 that you've just seen appear at the bottom, it's going to push through to my demo server. So it's just going to push that through to 72.26, unless that request is part of the glue inside of the Azure resource, and then it's going to route it differently. Anything that goes to API, it is automatically going to route to 7071, because that's the default for Azure functions. If you're running it on a different port, you can override it here. But going through everything that this Static Web App CLI does is kind of literally a different talk. But it works quite well for us. So if we come back to our browser and we go to localhost 4280. See, this is the reason why I've got so many snippets. This is the reason why I generally work with an external keyboard too. Now this is going to take a little bit longer to load because the CLI does introduce just a little bit of delay on that first load as it downloads all of the Wasm stuff, all of the .NET runtime. It is only when you actually load the page. Once it's there, it is really snappy. So this looks kind of the same as before, only now if I go to my blog post, ta-da! We have all of the blog posts that I've written. And if we click on one, it will open up in a new window, says she, hopefully. So there we go. This was literally the first step that I took when I wrote my own website. Get this out, and after that started to worry about doing different things. You can also debug from here. So if we reopen our Visual Studio, say we come into our blog post page, and we're just going to stick a breakpoint at the end, And we're going to go into our API and stick a breakpoint on our blog posts. Yeah, that's a good one. And then we go back to our page. Anybody else have the issue with Visual Studio 2022, by the way, that when you're in debug mode, it's really hard to switch windows? So when we reload, there we go. We've gone through to the API. We can now do all of the debugging that we'd normally do. We can see the request that's coming from the client, and we can work with it as we want to. And if we go a step further, then we can go into our Blazor code. So even though we're not using that URL given to us by the browser, all of the debugging still works for us. And I use this for my inner developer loop all the time when I'm working on my site. It's a really nice way to work. There is one proviso. That is, I put this URL in the same browser that Visual Studio opened up. And I did that deliberately. Because if I bring this into a different browser, and I paste it in here, even though I've still got that breakpoint set, it's going to load it, and I don't hit a breakpoint. And that is because when you're running the WebAssembly, the browser and Visual Studio have some awesome tunneling going on so that they can speak to each other, but it's only inside of that browser. So that one caught me out when I first started doing this, and I was pulling my hair out. Why does it work sometimes but not others? And it's really the browser that you choose is whether or not this works. So that's very quickly how we can debug. Now that we have our app loaded, our CI/CD flow is finished, we can now come back into our app. We can reload it. You see that's much quicker than it was on my home machine, local machine. And we can now load our blog posts. We can open these. And there we go. Inside of 20 minutes, I have got my first step live and out to production. There are problems here. If I refresh my page, I get a wonderful 404 error. And I get a wonderful 404 error because this is a static site and it is running a Blazor WebAssembly application, which means this URL doesn't exist. And so when you refresh, it all dies. We're going to solve this one in a second. The other one that we're going to look at the same time is what I was talking about with wanting to write my own blog posts in my own site. Like I say, I want to use my site to practice things. And for that, I need to set up authentication. Now, I am not an authentication person. I am really pleased at my company. We have somebody that specializes in that, and I ask their help. Static Web Apps has you covered for this. You've seen all of the code that I put in my application, but if I come in here and I go to .auth/login/Twitter, I now redirect to Twitter. I have to give consent because it wants to use stuff from my Twitter account. And I am now logged into my application using my Twitter authentication. And that is all part of the glue that comes with Azure Static Web Apps. Nothing's changed, of course, because I've got nothing in my app to take advantage of my authentication. But I can prove to you that there's something there by going to another URL inside of that glue, me. And if I look at me, then I can see that I have authenticated. Let's make that a bit bigger. I've authenticated using Twitter. I have a user ID assigned to me. I am not doxing myself at this point. This user ID is specific to this app. So if you make 3 Azure Static Web Apps and you log in with your Twitter account, you will have 3 different user IDs. They're not comparable between the two. I have my user details, which for Twitter is my handle. For GitHub and Twitter, it's your handle. If you use Azure Active Directory or Google, you get your email address, which is why I'm using my Twitter handle and not my email address. And at the bottom, we have our user roles that we have available. The anonymous and the authenticated, every single user which logs in on your site get these roles. These are the 2 default ones that come out of Microsoft. We can add more. We'll come to that later. So let's reset this one, or not. Yeah, that's okay. So what we're going to do now is add some basic authentication to the site. Or actually, we're going to see how to use the basic authentication in the site. So for this one, we are going to add a couple of code files in the API, a couple in the client. I'm going to apologize in advance because please do not build your code like this in real life, but there's like 5 different classes, and this is the quickest way to get it done when you're trying to do a lot in just an hour. So let's start our app. And inside of our API, we are going to add a new class, and we're going to call that Static Web App API Authentication. And we're going to bring over a whole load of code. Let's start at the bottom, because this is where our models are set up. When I went to auth.me, you saw the setup of the authentication data that you get from an Azure Static Web App, and that's what we have here. A client principal with the identity provider, the user ID, the user details, the user roles. We also have 2 new ones here. We have an IEnumerable of Static Web App claims, and we have an access token. And the claims are just simply 2 strings, type and value. This is for our custom authentication. We don't use these in the standard authentication. And then we're going to use that inside of our app by checking out the headers that come to our API. And this particular header that we're looking at is this one, the XMS client principal. Your users in their browsers will never see this header. This is something that the Azure Static Web App puts onto the requests as they route it back to your backend. So we can trust this for our authentication information. We get it from a base64 string, and then we deserialize it into that client principal, and from there we can work with it. And to turn it into a claims principal, we need to just do a little bit more processing. First of all, I'm stripping off the anonymous level, because honestly, I don't care if somebody's anonymous. If the only thing they have is anonymous, I'm going to treat them as not logged in, which is exactly what the next couple of lines do. After you've stripped out anonymous, if you don't have any roles left over, we're just going to return an empty claims principal. That person's not logged in, they're not authenticated, we don't know who they are. If they do have roles left to them, then we create a claims identity based on the identity provider they're using, passing in the user details and an amount of roles that they have. And from here on in, we can use our claims principal inside of our app to make sure that when I am writing blog posts, I am writing it under my name. And if I am in a multi-tenant environment and I'm reading stuff, I can only read the stuff that I have access to. You can also use this, of course, to check that people have access to your APIs. But there's a better way of doing that, so I wouldn't do that in the code here. So that's how we do the backend. And to show this working, we're just going to make a couple of extra Azure functions. So we're going to bring in one here, and we're going to call that one auth test. It's going to be HTTP trigger, again, because everything has to be. And we're going to bring in some code. So what we're doing here, we have another HTTP GET. We're leaving the root empty here. It's just going to be API/auth test. We are getting the claims principal back from the header. And then all I'm doing just to prove that this works is just dumping an amount of information out to the screen just so you can see it happening. And then once that's saved, we are going to copy this one, and we're going to use it again a second time. So where's paste? There's paste. And we're going to call this one, because naming in IT is hard, auth test 2. No, not auth test, auth test 2. So let's rename our class. We need to do it there. We need to do it here. Otherwise, the functions are going to complain. And we need to do it at the bottom so we get some decent information out. So now we have 2 authentication tests. And what we're going to do in a minute is actually set up the authorization on the APIs so that you need different roles to access these 2 different APIs. We're going to be doing that one in the front end. And we're going to come to that one in a second. So in the front end, we need to add a NuGet package to our app. So let's go and manage NuGet packages. And what we need is the ASP.NET Components authorization. When you install this, make sure you don't include pre-release, because version 7 is not compatible with version 6, and everything dies in a wonderfully interesting way. Unless you're using .NET 7, of course, in which case do use 7 in the pre-release, otherwise you're going to have different interesting errors. We're going to accept all the licenses because whoever reads those? And for the front end, we're going to make, again, a new class. And that one is going to be Static Web App Authentication Client State Provider. Bring this in. And again, we still have our client principal, the same as we had on the back end. And again, in my site, this is all in a separate project that takes care of all of the authorization. But again, that's a little bit too long-winded for a 1-hour demo. And what this one's going to do is when we get the authentication state inside of our app, we're going to first of all try and get our client principal. And that client principal, it's not coming from a header this time. It's actually coming from that .auth/me root that I was talking about and showed you earlier, because this is all running in the browser. When you make a request to that auth/me, you get all of your cookies sent with it, and the static web app can authenticate you, so it will give you the correct information back. Then we just do pretty much the same as we do on the API side. We are going to deserialize that to a client principal, and then we're going to go through exactly the same process to change that to a claims principal. From this point on, you are just authenticated inside of your Blazor app, and you can use it as normal. So let's do that. Number one, we need to add some extra services to our app. And we need to bring in a couple of namespaces to get rid of the squiggly lines. So we're going to bring in the ASP.NET Components Authentication, and we're going to bring in our client auth namespace. Now that we have this in place, we can start to make our app do cool stuff with authentication. Number one, we need to change our app.razor. So at the top here, we're going to bring in a cascading authentication state. And we're going to close that one as well. Otherwise, again, bad things happen. And we're going to sort out the tabbing because, again, I like tabbing to be good. Now, you can notice that we've got a green squiggly line here and nothing is in bold. And basically, our application does not know how to deal with this. That's because we need to bring in a using statement. Now, we can bring this using statement in here. And that makes it work inside of this component. But I'm going to be using this in multiple components, and I don't want to add this all the time. So actually, I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm going to open the absolutely awesome _imports.razor, and I'm going to bring it in here. Because now I've put it in my imports razor, it's available in all of my components. I don't have to think about this ever again until I open a new app, forget to put it in the imports razor, and pull my hair out trying to think why nothing's working. Then we're going to add some navigation so that our users can log in. So again, in our nav menu, we're going to add a new navigation link. And this has this authorized view. And you have a couple of options here. You're either authorized or you are not authorized. If somebody's authorized, we're going to give them access to a logout screen, and we're also going to give them a special button if they're a super user, because we want to let our super users know that they're super users. And if you're not logged in, well, we're just going to send you to Twitter to log in so that everything works. Last but not least, I said that we can ensure that our APIs also have authorization on them so that only the right people can access them. And to do that, we're going to create a config JSON. Now, this JSON exists in the client, even though it controls the API. And it exists in the client because that is where our static files live, and that is where the Azure Static Web Apps look to get their data. So inside of our www root, we're going to add a new item. And that new item is going to be a JSON file. And we're going to call that staticwebapp.config.json. Now, again, I can do, and I have, a whole talk about what you can do with this file to control all of the facets of your static web app. We're going to do just some really small stuff with it today. we're going to add some rules for our auth test. So if you want to access auth test, you have to be a super user. For our auth test 2, you just need to be authenticated. Anybody who logs in can use that one. You can also control access to your pages from here. Again, that's a slightly different demo for a slightly different talk, but all I'm going to say is don't. And the reason why don't is because this only works inside of the static web app. So people won't be able to deep link to your counter page. They'll get a 404. But if they're inside of the Blazor app, it's a single page application. If they click on an internal link to that page, it's still going to work. So use that authorized view inside of your app to control the client side. Then we have a route here. Now this is pointing to one of those glue pages, the auth login AAD. What this will do is stop people being able to use Azure Active Directory to log in. Like you saw in my first demo, everything out of the box works. We can just go straight to that Twitter login page, and it's there. But you might not want to let people log in with everything. So this allows you to just put some control over that and make sure they can only use the providers that you want them to use. And last but not least, we have this navigation fallback. This is going to stop that problem that we had with refreshing the page. So when it refreshes now, it's going to redirect to index.html, and it's going to let Blazor take care of all of that routing for us so that we can get back to the page we're on. We can do deep links and email links and ensure everything works. So one last build. Did this work? Did I do it right? It succeeded. Cool. So let's push this up to the front end again. Add auth. And we're going to commit and push. Come back up to here. Let's just check that we do actually have a new CI/CD flow kicked off. And we don't. And the reason why we don't is because I didn't push and pull. I need to push and pull, of course, because that workflow file was added to our GitHub repo. So when I tried to push, it went, not doing that. And I forget this in every single demo that I do. Now we have that running. This is good. So like I said, this is going to take about another 3 or so minutes to deploy. So whilst we're waiting for it to deploy, there's just a couple of extra things that I want to show you to really make our app look awesome. First one that I want to show you is custom domains. Because whilst I think that the domains that we get from Microsoft, so ambitious sky, yellow rock, scary sea, it sounds awesome, but it's not my brand. And I'm supposed to be doing this to build my brand. On top of that, I really don't want to tell people that you have to go to ambitious sky OEA480F 03.1 in order to get to my website. I want you to go to the actual place. Thankfully, that is also really easy to set up inside of a static web app. I am not doing this in the one I just created because you have to do stuff with your DNS provider in order to get this work. That can work in seconds, and it can work in 2 days. And I don't think you want to sit here for the next 2 days waiting for that bit to work. So I have this second one that I've set up, and we are going to add an extra domain to this one so that we can access it on my personal. We're going to do stacyclouds.com. Important thing here, this is where you get into the differences between that free tier and the standard tier. For the free tier, you can have 2 custom domains on your static web app. And that's really useful because if you want to do www.stacyclouds.com and stacyclouds.com, you need 2 custom domains in order to get that to work. On the paid version, you get 5. So that, I don't know why you want to use 5, but you get 5. So we're going to add a new custom domain here, and that's going to be www.stacy. Hey, look at that. It's already got it. stacyclouds.com. And then it's going to tell us what we need to do to our DNS to get this to work. We need to make a CNAME on the www level of our DNS records, and it has to point to our application. Then we click Add, and if I've picked the right domain name, this is now going to sit, and it's going to sit in the background and whirl away and do lots of interesting stuff for the coming 5 minutes. And hopefully by the time I reach the end of the talk, I'm going to be able to go, ta-da! Otherwise, I'm going to go, trust me, it works. Let's see which one we get to. How we're doing for our deploy. Come on, I would have thought you'd have been deployed by now. Where are we? 2 minutes 32. It's about another minute left to go. So I'm going to jump forward just a little bit. The other thing that we can have inside of our app, oh, come on, what do you mean I can't step away from this page? Grr. We'll do this a different way. The other thing that we want to do is to be able to push things to a production-like environment before we actually go to production. Remember me saying that the static web app isn't really a static web app, and it does have a couple of small differences between what you get locally and what you get in production? Well, there's an easy way to do that, thankfully. If we go back to our workflow file, it's in here somewhere. Not only do you have the build job, we also have this pull request job. And what that will do is do all of the normal steps that we had before, and it will spin up a staging environment for you so that you can test things in that production-like environment before you actually push them to production. And I'm in the UK. I don't know how old the people in the audience are, but in Great Blue Peter terms, here's one I made earlier. Inside of our pull request, we get a deploy for us. And we can click on this and come out. And assuming Azure does its thing, we have an application. Now, what I want to show you is this fetch data, because I originally wrote this demo in the middle of winter. So, oh, the weather outside is frightful. And that's the last I sing. Originally, it said something different. So let's compare it to the original if I can do this right. The way that it builds up the URL, you can see that we have this West Europe and we have this one. That is a change that it adds to your staging account. What that means is, whilst your general static web apps are available around the world, your staging apps are hosted in a particular region. So obviously they're still available everywhere, but they aren't actually stored in a certain place. Now, have I deleted the right things? I've not deleted the right things. Damn it. Oh, good, but that's closed, so we can come to here. So inside of this, oh, that's interesting. I can't show you it completely. We see the URL is actually changed to stacyclouds.com now. And if we open this, please trust me, this is the same one. Oh, come on. Okay, Microsoft Azure has done something slightly interesting here. Please trust me, this does generally work. I'm guessing the certificate isn't quite correct setup yet. That generally sorts itself out after a few minutes, and of course, not in the middle of a demo. So please, just trust me. You're going to have to trust me on this one. You set up your staging account. You can check that it works as it does. You can check the differences are what they need to be. And then when you complete your pull request, it even cleans up after itself. So your staging environments disappear as you close your pull requests. Your work in progress is also kind of forced here because you only have a limited number of staging slots that you can use. These are by default open to the world. So if you're deploying something that people shouldn't look at, you need to go into the configuration and turn that off. You can put it behind a password. That's a relatively new thing. When they first came out, all Microsoft said was, these are open to the world, and if you don't want them to be, don't use the staging slots. Turn that off in your pipeline. At least we're one step further along now. So how are we doing for our actions? Okay, the action's finished now, which means if we come in here and reboot, we should now be able to log in. Now, I'm already logged in as Twitter, so we can see that I'm a standard user here. And if I try and go to API/auth-test, we should get a 403 forbidden error. So that comes from that static web app config that I was showing you. If, on the other hand, we go to test 2, we actually see that that function runs and we can see it. So again, without us actually having to put that authorization onto the APIs, it exists for us. And again, code I don't have to write is code that I can't introduce bugs to. So there's one last thing that I want to show you, and that is adding roles to our application, because I want to actually get to see that authentication test URL, this one. So what I'm going to do is log out of here. I'm going to come back and come to role management inside of the static web app. This is another one where that difference between the standard tier and the free tier matters. On the free tier, you can only add 25 records here. That is not to say you can only have 25 users, but you can only have 25 users with special roles. For many apps, that's going to be enough. If it's not enough, you can take the standard tier, and then in this page, you can do 25 different roles, which sounds kind of similar, and I don't know why Microsoft's done that. What you can do if you've got custom authentication in the standard tier is you can write an Azure function to provide the roles. You get a request from the static web app, you get the access token from your user, you get a load of extra information, and you can define your roles at that point, and then it is unlimited. What we're going to do here is just invite somebody in, and we're going to use GitHub here, and it's going to be Stacy Cash, because it's going to be me. And we're going to give Stacy Cash super user rights. So we're going to generate a link. We're going to copy this, and we're going to bring it in here. Now, again, I'm going to have to consent to this because I've never used it before. And now I am a super user, so I should now have access to that API. So let's do a quick check before we finish. Where's auth test / auth test? And there we go. That is how quick and easy it is to get roles set up. An extra proviso here, it is this quick and easy to set up, but it is also cached inside of your static web app. So if you need to change this, it's going to take about 25 minutes before it takes effect, and that does include deleting people from your application. You don't have instant control if you do it via the roles page. And looking at the time, we're about out, which is not bad timing. So we had a few interesting bits in there. I'm sorry not everything worked, but in about 50 minutes or so, we have created a website, we created the API, we've deployed it up to Azure into a production environment, not production like our production environment. We've set up a CI/CD pipeline. We have checked how we can debug locally. We've also checked how to make sure that things going into production actually do what they're supposed to do in production. And we have had a quick look at the standard level of authentication so that you can check that the users using your app are the users that are supposed to be using your app. I hope that you found this interesting and inspiring. There's a QR code on the page that will take you to the MS Learn documentation so that you can try this for yourself. If you're not inspired to try it yourself, go there anyway, because seriously, MS Learn is so full of awesome information. It's just a URL that you should be checking out. Thank you so much for your time today. I am happy that I didn't fall over the gap behind the stage, which I was worried about before I started. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.